Once upon a time, in a small, beautiful town, there lived a young woman named Amma, but popularly called Mama Kia. Mama Kia had carried her baby in her belly longer than anyone had ever seen 12 full moons, and still no cry of a child. The villagers shook their heads in wonder. "This is not normal," they whispered. "Even elephants don't wait that long." Then, one bright morning, the sun danced on the rooftops, and Amma screamed her labor had begun. People dropped their farming tools and cooking pots, rushing to her small hut. The air buzzed with excitement and fear. Inside the hut, the midwife worked hard, her hands trembling as sweat dripped from her forehead. The baby was coming, but something felt different, something strange. The villagers stood outside, their hearts pounding like the drums at the village square. Finally, the door creaked open and the midwife stepped out. Her face was pale, as if she had seen a spirit. Her voice shook as she whispered, "It's a girl, but she has two heads." The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths, others their eyes. "Two heads! What kind of child is this?" they murmured. Curiosity burned in their hearts, and they pushed closer to the hut. When the baby was brought out, the crowd froze. One head was fair, like the golden sand by the river. The other was dark, like the shadow under the tall owa tree. The people stared, their mouths open. Some shook their heads, muttering, "This is not a child, this is a curse." Others smiled and said, "No, this is a blessing. Two heads must mean double wisdom." Amma looked at her baby, her eyes soft with love. She didn't care about curses or blessings. "My child is special," she said, holding the baby close. The villagers argued as they stood outside her hut. "What do we call this? Twins or one child?" someone asked. But before anyone could answer, an elder with a long white beard raised his hand. "Let the heads have names," he said. "The fair one shall be called Leah, for peace. The dark one shall be called Dea, for strength." And so the baby with two heads was named Leah and Dea and Dea. The villagers returned to their homes, whispering stories of what they had seen. Some said the baby was a gift from the gods. Others believed Mama Kia must have done something wrong to bring such a strange child into the world. Leah and Dea grew fast, like yam vines after the first rain. Amma would shake her head, laughing. These two heads share one stomach. They cry together, eat together, and even sleep at the same time. As they grew older, Leah and Dea amazed everyone in the village. They didn't just walk early, they ran. They didn't just talk, they spoke in ways that made people stop and listen. By the time they started school, it was clear they were different in more ways than one. In the classroom, they always knew the answers. "No wonder they're the best in class, they have two heads." The other children would laugh. The teacher was proud, saying Leah and Dea are a blessing to this village. They will make us proud someday. But little did they know, even two heads don't always think the same way. Leah loved rice the way the grains smelled when they were cooked just right. Dea, on the other hand, craved beans, especially with spicy stew. At the dining table, they would argue like in a fight. "Rice is better," Leah would insist, her fair head turning slightly. "No, beans are better," Dea would argue back, her dark head shaking. Amma would laugh and say, "You two, settle down. Rice today, beans tomorrow." It wasn't just food. They liked different colors too. Leah's eyes lit up when she saw a bright yellow dress. "This one is perfect," she'd say, but Dea's lips would twist in disagreement. "No, the red one is better," she'd argue. The villagers loved them, watching in amazement as they played and studied. "Two heads, one body," they would say. "Even if they fight, they have no choice but to get along." The sisters grew stronger each day, their bond like the roots of a baobab tree, impossible to break. Though they were different, they were always together, and the village grew used to their unique ways. As Leah and Dea grew into beautiful young women, their laughter softened, their steps became graceful, and their eyes shone with wisdom. The villagers marveled at how they had blossomed. But when it came to marriage, the men hesitated. "How can you marry two heads?" they whispered among themselves. "It's like having two wives in one body." The sisters heard the whispers, but kept their heads high. Amma consoled them, saying, "The right man will come. Be patient, my daughters." Finally, 3 men showed interest in marrying them, one after the other, but that's when the real trouble began, because none of the men could please them. First came Adam. He was tall, bold, and as confident as the roaring river after a storm. His laughter was loud, his voice deep, and his presence filled every room he entered. Dea's dark eyes sparkled the first time she saw him. "He's the one," Dea whispered. "He's strong, handsome, and fearless." But Leah wasn't convinced. "He's too loud," she said, frowning. Dea wouldn't hear it. "Give him a chance. He's perfect for us," she insisted, her excitement as bright as a midday sun. Reluctantly, Leah agreed. Adam courted them with gifts of sweet palm wine and stories of his bravery. Dea's heart grew fonder with each visit, while Leah watched him with weary eyes. The wedding was grand, with drummers, dancers, and a full spread across the village square. The elders blessed the union, and the villagers cheered. Amma smiled through her tears, saying, "May this marriage bring joy to my daughters." At first, everything seemed fine. Adam's boldness made Dea laugh, and his boldness made Dea laugh, and his strength made her feel safe. But Leah couldn't stand him. She found his voice too loud, his laughter too sharp. "He doesn't care about what I want," Leah complained. "He's always listening to Dea." Adam tried his best to please them both. But no matter what he did, Leah wasn't happy. She argued with him at every turn. "I can't live like this," Leah finally said one night. "I don't like him, Dea. Why should I be stuck with someone I don't want?" The fights grew louder, like a storm that wouldn't end. Aiden grew weary. "How can I please both of you at the same time?" he shouted one evening. After just a year, the marriage crumbled like a clay pot dropped from a height. Adam walked away, his head bowed in defeat. The villagers shook their heads in disappointment. "We knew this would happen," they said. "Two heads, one body, it's a curse." But Leah and Dea didn't listen. They returned to their mother's home, their hearts heavy but determined. Dea whispered to Leah, "Maybe the next man will be better." And with that hope, they waited. Not long after Adan left, another suitor stepped forward. His name was Nalo. Unlike Adan, Nalo was calm, with a voice as soft as the morning breeze and a heart as kind as the gentle rain. Leah's fair face lit up the first time she saw him. "He's perfect," she said, her voice soft with admiration. He listens. He understands. He's nothing like Aiden, but Daya wasn't convinced. He's too quiet, she said, frowning. How can a man so silent protect us? He's boring. Leia wouldn't hear any complaints. We need peace, Daya, she insisted. Nalo will bring us that. With Leia leading the way, they agreed to marry Nalo. The wedding was smaller this time, quieter, just like Nalo himself. Amma blessed them with a cautious smile, hoping this union would last. At first, everything seemed perfect. Nalo brought calmness to their lives. He spoke softly, cooked meals with them, and even helped with little chores around the house. Leia blossomed in his care. She would laugh softly and say, Nalo makes me feel whole. But Daya felt left out. Nalo's gentleness didn't touch her the same way. He doesn't even talk to me, Diya complained to Leia one quiet evening as they sat by the dimly lit fire in their small home. He only cares about you. You're imagining things, Leia replied, brushing her off as she poked at the embers with a stick. Nalo is kind to both of us, but Daya's unhappiness grew. She began to sulk during meals, often picking at her food with a frown and snapping at Leia over small things, like the way she arranged their shared belongings or how she spoke to Nalo. The sisters argued more and more, their voices rising like clashing cymbals in the otherwise peaceful evenings. Nalo tried his best to mediate, stepping in with his calm demeanor. Please, can we not fight? He would say, his voice pleading, his eyes tired from trying to keep the harmony. But no matter how much he tried, the peace he brought slowly cracked under the weight of their quarrels. One evening, after a particularly loud argument that echoed through the village, Nalo sat down heavily at the edge of the room, his face drawn with exhaustion. I can't take this anymore, Nalo finally said, his voice heavy with sadness. I wanted to make you happy, but I can't. This marriage isn't working. His words lingered in the air like the last embers of a dying fire. After 2 years, Nalo walked away, his figure disappearing down the dusty path, leaving Leia and Dea behind. The villagers who had been quietly observing the events shook their heads and whispered louder than ever. They're cursed, some said, their voices laced with pity and judgment. No man can handle them. Amma comforted her daughters as best as she could, her hands gentle on their backs as they wept. Sometimes love takes time, she said softly, though even she began to wonder if her daughters would ever find happiness. As Leia and Dea sat together that night, the warm glow of the fire casting shadows on their tear-streaked faces, Dea sighed deeply. Maybe love isn't meant for us, she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the crackling of the fire. But Leia shook her head, her voice steady with resolve. We will find someone, she said, her fair face set with determination. I know it. And so they waited once more, holding on to hope like a flickering flame in the wind. The days passed slowly, the house feeling emptier without Nalo. Leia and Dea tried to keep themselves busy, tending to their small garden and weaving baskets to sell in the market. Yet their hearts longed for love, a longing that neither work nor time could fill. Then came Oben, the merchant. He arrived in the village one sunny afternoon, his arrival marked by the jingling of bells attached to his cart and the excited chatter of the villagers. Oben was lively, with eyes that sparkled like morning dew and a voice that could make even the saddest heart smile. He spoke of faraway lands, golden sunsets, and markets bustling with treasures. The villagers, drawn to his charm, gathered around him eagerly to hear his tales. When Oban met Leia and Dea, his smile widened, his gaze lingering on their unique beauty. Two heads, twice the beauty, he said with a hearty laugh, his voice carrying over the crowd. Leia and Dea couldn't help but smile back, their spirits lifting for the first time in weeks. His charm was like honey, it drew everyone in effortlessly. He's wonderful, Leia said later that evening, her fair head tilting slightly as she spoke to Dea. I like him too, Dea agreed, her dark eyes shining with a rare sparkle of excitement. For the first time, they both liked the same man. Amma, observing their shared joy, prayed silently, her hands clasped tightly. May this one bring them peace, she whispered, her heart heavy with hope. The wedding was a grand affair filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of delicious food wafting through the village square. The villagers whispered among themselves, maybe this time it will work. At first, it seemed their prayers were answered. Oben showered Leia and Dea with gifts from his travels, beautiful fabrics, sparkling beads, and exotic spices. His stories filled their evenings with laughter, and his love seemed to bring light into their lives. But soon, the troubles began. Leia felt Oben spent too much time with Dea. One evening, as the moonlight streamed through the window, she finally voiced her feelings. He only loves you, she complained to Dea, her voice trembling. He hardly looks at me. That's not true, Dea snapped back, her temper flaring. You're just jealous because he likes my laughter. The arguments grew louder, like thunder rumbling before a storm. At first, Oben tried to keep the peace. My beautiful wives, he would say, his voice laced with both affection and exhaustion. Why do you fight? You are both precious to me. But his words couldn't calm the storm brewing between the sisters. The fights became worse, with Leia and Dea blaming each other for every small thing, from the way Oben smiled to the stories he chose to tell. One evening, their anger boiled over. Their voices rose like clashing cymbals, sharp and unyielding, until they began shouting and hitting each other. Their shared anguish erupted in a way that frightened even themselves. Oben, standing in the corner with his hands on his head, finally reached his breaking point. Enough, he shouted, his voice echoing through the small home. I cannot live like this. I love you both, but I cannot take this madness. His once bright smile was replaced by a heavy frown as he packed his belongings. After a year, Oben left, his figure disappearing down the same path as Nalos had. The villagers shook their heads, their whispers now louder and filled with finality. It's clear now, they said. They are cursed. No man can make them happy. Leia and Dea stayed in their mother's hut, their hearts heavy with guilt and sorrow. Amma tried to comfort them, but even her gentle words couldn't heal their pain. One fateful day, as the sun set over the horizon, Leia and Dea walked slowly along the dusty path, a water pot balanced on their shared head. The golden light bathed the landscape in a soft glow, but their hearts felt heavier than the pot they carried. When they reached the river, the sight of the calm water only made their sadness grow. They set down the pot and sat on the grassy bank, their two heads bowed low in silence. Tears rolled down Leia's fair cheek and dripped onto Dea's darker one. As they sat there, the sound of the river's gentle flow seemed to echo their sorrow. It was then that they noticed an old woman sitting on a smooth rock by the river. Her back was bent like an old tree, and her face was covered in wrinkles that seemed to tell 1,000 stories. But her eyes, they sparkled like stars, reflecting a wisdom that went beyond the years etched into her face. "Why are you crying, my children?" the old woman asked, her voice soft but strong, carrying across the quiet riverbank. Leia and Dea looked up, surprised by her sudden presence. They glanced at each other in confusion. "Who is she?" Leia whispered to Dea. "I don't know," Dea replied, wiping her tears quickly, as if embarrassed by her sorrow. The old woman smiled gently, her expression radiating warmth. "Come closer," she said, patting the smooth rock beside her. Something about her felt safe, like the comforting embrace of their mother. The sisters hesitated for a moment before getting up and sitting beside her, their hearts curious despite their grief. "Tell me, why are you crying?" the old woman asked again, her voice soothing like the river's gentle flow. The words spilled out like water from a broken pot. Leia and Dia told her everything: the failed marriages, the villagers' harsh whispers, and the deep sadness they carried in their hearts. As they spoke, the old woman listened quietly, nodding now and then, her wise eyes never leaving theirs. When they finished, she looked at them with a gaze full of understanding. "Your pain is heavy," she said, her voice like a soothing breeze, "but it is not without cause." "What do you mean?" Leia asked, her voice trembling with both fear and hope. The old woman leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Ask your mother what happened when she was pregnant with you," she said. "She has a secret." "A secret?" Dea echoed, her eyes widening in surprise. The old woman nodded slowly, her expression serious. "A truth that has been buried for too long. Go, my children, speak to her." Before they could ask more, the old woman stood up. She walked to the river's edge and disappeared into the twilight, leaving only ripples on the water. Leaving only ripples on the water. Leia and Dea sat there in silence, her words echoing in their minds. A secret? What could Amma be hiding? They picked up their pot, filled it with water, and hurried home. Leia and Dea returned home. Leia and Dea returned home, their faces wet with tears. They sat at Amma's feet, their voices trembling. "Mother, we need to talk," Leia said, her voice shaking. "What is it, my children?" Amma asked, setting her wooden spoon down. Dea spoke quickly, her words rushing like the river. "We met an old woman by the river. She said you have a secret, something about when you were pregnant with us." Amma froze, her hands, wrinkled and strong, gripping the edge of her wrapper. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mother, please," Leia begged. "Tell us the truth. What happened when you were pregnant with us?" Amma's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, staring at the fire as if searching for courage in its flames. "It's not something I ever wanted to talk about," she began. "But maybe it's time you knew." She took a deep breath, her voice heavy with sorrow. "When I was pregnant with you, there was a day the sun was so hot it felt like the earth itself was burning. I was walking back from the market, my throat dry as a desert. When I passed the river, I couldn't resist. I knew the tradition pregnant women are forbidden to go near the river during the hot afternoon, but I was so thirsty. Her voice broke, and she wiped her tears with the edge of her wrapper. I bent down to drink, and that's when I felt it a cold hand on my shoulder. I looked up, and there she was, the river spirit. Her eyes were like deep pools, and her voice was like thunder. "You have broken the law," she said. "For this you will pay." Amma's tears flowed freely now. She cursed me. "You were supposed to be twins, but her curse made you two heads, one body." The room fell silent. Leia and Dea stared at their mother, their faces pale with shock. "Mother!" Leia whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I was ashamed," Amma said, tears streaming down her face. "I hoped the curse would not define your lives, but now I see it has." Leia and Dea sat in silence, their hearts heavy with this new knowledge. Finally, Dea spoke. "We must go to the river. We must go to the river. We must speak to the spirit." Leia and Dea exchanged a glance. They knew what they had to do. Without another word, they turned and left the house, heading back to the river to find the old woman. When they reached the riverbank, the old woman was waiting, her figure silhouetted against the moonlight. "You know the truth now," she said. "Yes," Leia replied. "Mother told us everything." "Can the curse be broken?" The old woman nodded. "It can," she said, "but it will require a great sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Dea asked, her voice trembling. "You will know when the time comes," the woman replied. "Go back to your village. Tell them what must be done. If they agree, the curse can be lifted. If not, you will remain as you are." Leia and Dea looked at each other, fear and hope swirling in their eyes. They nodded, thanked the old woman, and turned back toward the village, carrying the weight of her words in their hearts. The villagers gathered in the square after hearing Leia and Dea's story. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The curse wasn't just the sisters' burden. It was now the villagers' responsibility. The old woman from the river appeared, her presence as commanding as the rising sun. She spoke with a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. To break the curse, the entire village must come together for 7 days. Offerings must be made to the river spirit, food, oil, and animals, and Leia and Dea must stay in the shrine by the river, fasting and praying. Only then will the curse be lifted. Though some grumbled about the cost, the villagers agreed. On the first day, they brought yams and palm oil. On the second day, chickens clucked as they were offered to the river. By the third day, goats bleated, and the aroma of incense filled the air. Meanwhile, Leia and Dea stayed in the shrine, weak from hunger, but strong in spirit. They knelt side by side, their prayers rising like smoke from a fire. "Please let this work," Leia whispered, her voice faint. "We'll endure anything," Dea added, her head bowing low. Each day, the villagers returned with more offerings, their faces filled with hope. The air grew heavier as the days passed, and even the children, who didn't fully understand, prayed with their small hands clasped tightly. On the 7th day, the sky darkened. Thunder roared, and the river rose high, its waves crashing like an angry beast. The villagers watched in fear, their offerings trembling in their hands. Then, as suddenly as it began, the storm stopped. The river became calm, its surface smooth like glass. The old woman stepped forward. "Come out, my children," she called. The villagers held their breath as Leia and Dea stepped out of the shrine. Gasps, filled the air. They were no longer conjoined. Each had her own body. Leah stood on the left, fair and glowing, and Dea stood on the right, her dark skin radiant. The villagers erupted in cheers. "The curse is broken!" they cried. "The river spirit has forgiven them." Leah and Dea smiled, tears streaming down their faces. For the first time, they felt whole free to live their lives as individuals. In the months that followed, Leah married a kind blacksmith, and Dea found love with a gentle farmer. They both had children and lived happily, their bond as sisters unbroken. Their bond as sisters unbroken. The villagers, too, learned their lesson. From that day on, no pregnant woman dared to go to the river in the hot afternoon. The tale of Leah and Dea became a story of hope, love, and the power of sacrifice. The story of Amma, Leah, and Dea offers a valuable lesson. Every action we take, no matter how small, can have lasting consequences, not just for ourselves, but for others as well. Amma's decision to break the sacred tradition of the river, though driven by desperation, led to a life-changing curse that her daughters had to bear. This reminds us of the importance of respecting traditions, values, and wisdom that have been passed down through generations. Furthermore, the story highlights the power of unity, sacrifice, and hope. The villagers coming together to lift the curse shows that challenges can be overcome through collective effort, compassion, and determination. Be mindful of your actions, honor traditions when they carry wisdom, and remember that empathy and solidarity can overcome even the greatest obstacles. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe button to stay updated with more inspiring stories. See you in the next video. Once upon a time, in a distant village called Ela, there lived a kind-hearted man named Dami. Dami had 2 wives. His first wife was Lara, and the second wife was Bola. Lara was a very gentle and kind woman. She was loved by everyone. She had a beautiful daughter named Kemi. 8 years had passed since she had kids. Children were no longer coming, and she could no more have children, which saddened her deeply. Because of this, Dami's family made trouble with Laura, urging Dami to marry his second wife, which he bluntly refused. One day, Mama Dami came to visit them in their house in Aduwu town, where Dami and his wife lived. Lara was very happy to see her mother-in-law since she had not seen her for a while. She quickly offered her a seat and fetched some water, her warm smile reflecting genuine joy. "Ah, Mama, you're welcome. Oh, how was your trip?" she happily asked her as she tried to take her luggage. "I will be fine when you give my son children. I want grandchildren, not a grandchild. What if anything happens to her? I'll be left with none. Please, please don't ask me if I'm fine. You know I'm not fine, and I won't be until you give me more grandchildren." After dropping her mother-in-law's luggage, she went straight to her room and cried. All through her stay in the house, Mama refused to talk to Laura or eat anything she prepared. Dami's mother urged him to marry a second wife, hoping for more grandchildren. "Mama, I love my wife so much, and God has blessed us with a beautiful, intelligent, and hardworking daughter, and she's enough now." Enough? What is enough for where she's not enough? We want more grandchildren. We want a full house. We know she's everything you've mentioned, and we love her, but we want more to be on the safer side. When the pressure became too much, Laura pleaded with her husband to get a second wife. Dami refused, but when she kept begging, he had to listen to her. So Dami married Bola, who seemed nice at first but soon showed her true colors. Bola was not kind like Lara. She had two daughters, Funmi and Said, and two sons, Tayo and Sei. For Dami, unlike Lara's child, Bola's children were not kind and often behaved badly, just like their mother, who always caused a lot of trouble in the house. Sometimes, Dami would travel with his lovely wife, Lara, to a neighboring town to have a quiet time with his wife, just so they could rest from Bola's troubles. One day, while returning from a friend's wedding in his hometown, their car was involved in a ghastly accident. Both Dami and Lara died. This saddened Kimi's heart as she was lonely and alone. Tears became unbearable. One day, while she was crying, Bola walked to her and said, "See, you better stand up from here and do something useful with your life." Kemi's tear-streaked face twisted in anguish, her hands trembling as she clutched her knees, trying to steady herself under Bola's cold gaze. "Do you think your tears will bring them back? You better go and wash the dishes and prepare food for me and my children to eat." With Laura and Dami gone, Bola became very cruel to Kemi. She made Kemi do all the house chores and would not let her rest. Oftentimes, she would not give her food until evening, so she continued to suffer in the hands of her stepmother. She became a maid in her own father's house. Each time Mama came visiting, she pretended as though she had been very nice to Kemi and never allowed her to visit Olamide, their grandmother. As Kimi grew up, many young men came to ask for her hand in marriage because she was not only beautiful but also had a good heart. But Bola chased them away, saying all manner of awful things about her to scare them away, always saying her daughters were better suited for marriage. One day, while Kimi went on an errand for her stepmother, she mistakenly kicked a stone and fell down. A poor-looking and handsome young man helped her up. His name was Della. Della was dressed in old clothes and looked very poor. They both exchanged pleasantries. He saw her off to where she was going, walked her to her house, and left. The streets were quiet, lined with small huts and flickering lanterns, casting long shadows that danced in the evening breeze. "I think I like her," he said to himself, smiling. "I will just make her my friend and watch her carefully. I'll make some findings to know who she really is." Dell was just a common bread seller who sold bread by the roadside. After making his findings, he concluded that he was going to marry her. Since her stepmother doesn't accept good-looking and wealthy men to marry her, then she will accept a poor bread seller like me. Perfect, he said. So he became her friend. Sometimes he would visit her and vice versa. Bola never complained about Dell because she felt he was the kind of person Kimi needed, a very poor man. So she was happy each time she saw the both of them together. One day, a man who had been talking to Kemi about marriage came to ask for her hand in marriage. She was happy. He was a good man, and she was going to accept his proposal. But when Bola realized that if she didn't do something, the marriage might work out, she came up with an evil plan with her children. Bola asked Kimi to prepare food for her in-laws. When the food was ready, Bola added a lot of salt and pepper to the food. When it was time to serve the food, Kemi served the food. Immediately, when the visitors had a taste of it, they screamed and asked who prepared the food. They all pointed at Kemi. They shouted at her, Is this how you will kill our son? With your bad food? And they left angrily. Kimi cried, when will I ever get married? All my mates are getting married. Bola's 2 daughters are married to men who came from my hand in marriage. When will I ever be free from this bondage? She kept lamenting and crying. When Del heard about Kimi's marriage rejection, he was heartbroken because he liked her and was waiting for the right time to ask for her hand in marriage. Well, I'm happy for her hand in marriage. Perhaps she was never mine. She's my friend anyway. I wish her a happy married life. So he continued his business, only for him to hear people whispering. When he got to the scene and asked what the matter was, he was surprised. He knew it was Boa's handiwork. He quickly packed his bread and ran to Kami's house. She was crying profusely. It's okay, stop crying. I know it's not your fault. I've tasted your food, and I know you're a good cook. This is Bola's underhanded work, and I know it, he said. So he took her to his house, and she was there till evening. Then he walked her back home. When he returned to his house, he said to himself, perhaps she's the one. What better time to ask for her hand in marriage? If not now, but I wouldn't want to rush her with all this drama that has just happened. I will give her a little time, then pop the question. He was so excited, hoping she wouldn't turn him down. After a month, Dele asked Bola if he could marry Kemi. Bola laughed and thought to herself, why not this poor man can have her? It's no loss to me. In fact, this is the kind of person she should get married to. She accepted, knowing Dele was poor. Still, Kemi saw kindness in his eyes and agreed to marry him. He's the only friend I have, and he's a very nice person. Though he might not have enough, we can work together and make this life a better and more conducive place for us and our children, she thought. So she agreed to marry him. As the wedding day approached, Bola and her daughters pretended to help but kept mocking and laughing at them because they could barely afford anything. They had just a few drinks and food, but they didn't mind. After the wedding, Del took Kemi to his home, which was far from the village. Kemi was surprised they didn't stop at a small hut, as she expected, but at a very big and beautiful house surrounded by gardens and fields, with lots of maids at her beck and call. Del then revealed he was not poor at all, but a very wealthy man who had disguised himself to find a true and loving wife. Kemi was amazed and happy, not because of the wealth, but because she found someone who truly loved and respected her. Meanwhile, Bola's sons were wayward, always bringing trouble to her. She married off Funmi and said to 2 of the rich men that once came to seek for their hands in marriage, but their bad characters were soon discovered. Kimi and Dele lived happily and always treated everyone with kindness, just as Kimi had done all her life, no matter how her stepmother had treated her. As time went by, Kimi and Dele were known not just for their wealth, but also for their generosity and kindness. They often helped the villagers with their problems and provided for those in need. Kimi never forgot how she was treated by her stepmother, so she made sure to treat everyone with respect and compassion. One day, a big festival was announced in the village. It was an annual festival that was held once every year. Del's family had been the host since the father passed away. Del had hosted for the past 3 years. The festival marked the time of the year when they gained freedom from a neighboring kingdom that had held them captive for ages, taking all their crops and leaving them with almost nothing to feed on. It was Del's great-great-grandfather who took his 7 sons and conquered the entire kingdom, bringing victory to the people.